Hi, my name's Delara. Last year, my sister, my own flesh and blood, looked me in the eye, handed me a $2 check, and said I was no longer needed. She took everything I built, my company, my team, my seat at the table, and gave it to the man she was sleeping with. They didn't just kick me out. They laughed as they slammed the door. But here's the thing. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I stayed quiet, just long enough for the world to hear the truth. And now, they're the ones scrambling to stay silent. What happened next? You won't believe how far they were willing to go to bury me. But let's start at the beginning. The rain hit the windshield in uneven waves, matching the pit in my stomach that had been growing since I left my apartment that morning. Chicago always had a way of making cold feel colder, the kind of chill that sinks into your bones, not because of the temperature, but because something just felt off. I should have known. The minute Cambria asked me to come in early, said the board had a few strategic adjustments to discuss. She smiled when she said it, that fake, glossy smile that never reached her eyes. My sister always played her cards close, but I'd learned, too late, that she never showed up without a plan. The lobby of our headquarters felt like a stranger's house. It still had my name on the wall, embossed in brushed steel behind the reception desk. Delris Technologies. But this morning, I didn't feel like I belonged there. Not really. I took the elevator up to the top floor, trying to quiet the tightness in my chest. Deep breath in. Hold. Out. I had founded this company with nothing but a laptop and 3 years of sleepless nights. An AI app that was now valued at $250 million. They used to call me the quiet workhorse of the family. Never flashy, never loud. I didn't care. Results were my loudest voice. The boardroom lights were already on when I walked in. Cambria sat at the head of the table, her posture perfect, her nails tapping against her phone screen. Around her, 6 other members of the board were seated. I noticed Rick avoided my eyes, so did Naomi. Cambria stood up. "Delara, glad you could make it. Let's get started." There was no small talk, no update on the product pipeline, no budget review. Just silence, and then Cambria's voice, crisp like winter glass. "There's been a motion presented to the board," she said. "Given concerns around leadership compatibility and vision alignment, we're moving to restructure the executive team." I blinked. "Wait, what?" Cambria didn't look at me. She looked at the others. "Effective immediately, Delara Amiri is relieved of her duties as CEO." My ears were ringing, like I was underwater. I looked around the room. Some wouldn't meet my gaze. Some looked sorry, but no one said anything. "Are you kidding me?" I said, my voice cracking through the quiet. "This is my company." Cambria turned toward me then. Calm, calculated. It was your company. You had a brilliant idea, Delara, but running a business of this size takes more than brilliance. It takes alignment, scale, and trust, and unfortunately, you've lost the board's confidence. I looked at Rick. He had once promised to back me no matter what. I looked at Naomi. She'd mentored me through my first investor meeting. Nothing. No one stood up. My throat burned. "Who's replacing me?" Cambria smiled again. "We'll be naming Vincent as interim CEO while we transition." Vincent, her boyfriend. The man who, 6 months ago, I caught sneaking confidential code to an external server. Cambria swore he didn't mean it, called it a misunderstanding, asked me to drop it for the good of the company. Now he was taking my place. "Are you out of your mind?" I whispered. She took a step toward me, reached into her oversized handbag, pulled out 2 crumpled dollar bills, and dropped them on the glossy conference table. "Here, your severance," she said. "Consider it a kindness." I stared at the bills. $2. That was the price she put on me. On my years, my blood, my time, my silence. The room was dead quiet. You could hear the rain patter against the glass walls behind us. I didn't say a word. I picked up the bills, looked Cambria in the eye, and tucked them into my coat pocket. "You'll regret this," I said, soft and steady. Cambria leaned in slightly, almost amused. "Not likely. But do take care, little sister." I walked out without another word. Down the hall, into the elevator, out the front door, and into the storm. Rain soaked through my coat, through my hair. I didn't even try to cover up. I stood there, letting the cold drive home the humiliation. Then I looked up at the building, at my name, still shining above the entrance. But not for long. They think I'll stay silent," I whispered to myself. "They really think this ends here." I clenched the 2 bills tighter in my hand. This was just the beginning. I stood there, water dripping from my sleeves, and something inside me told me not to move. Not yet. Not until I saw the whole truth. My shoes felt glued to the sidewalk, my fingers still clutching the 2 crumpled bills Cambria had tossed at me like a joke. Then the front doors of the building slid open. Out came Cambria, heels clicking confidently against the pavement. She didn't even look back. Her coat collar was popped up, shielding her from the rain she didn't seem to feel. Right behind her was a tall man in a sleek gray suit, sharp jawline, thick glasses. His hand grazed the small of her back. Subtle, but not subtle enough. He was smiling. She was laughing. I narrowed my eyes. Something about him was familiar. My brain took a second to catch up. Alan Tierney. That name still made my teeth clench. A financial consultant we'd interviewed last fall. Cambria had pitched him hard as a strategic fixer, someone who could help us scale before our next funding round. I'd looked into him. Something didn't sit right. Too many vague job titles, too many shell companies. I vetoed the hire. And here he was, smiling with my sister. In the rain, walking like they owned the place. Cambria reached into her coat pocket and handed him a thick white envelope. He took it, tucked it into his briefcase, and then leaned toward her, just slightly. I saw her tilt her head, and their lips met, barely hidden by one of the concrete pillars outside the building. It wasn't a thank you kind of kiss. I stepped back. My stomach flipped. So that was the game. This wasn't about leadership alignment or vision. It wasn't even about Vincent, the so-called interim CEO. Cambria had used the company as her personal chessboard, and I was just the piece she needed to sacrifice. I started walking. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away before I did something I'd regret. 10 minutes later, I pushed open the glass door of a small cafe on Clark Street. The place hadn't changed in years. Soft jazz playing, smell of cinnamon and espresso in the air, and the same old creaky floors. I used to come here before big meetings, before I became too busy to enjoy a quiet booth and black coffee. The barista gave me a quick glance. I must have looked like a stray cat, hair soaked, coat hanging limp, eyes probably redder than I realized. "Sit wherever you like, hun," she said gently. I slid into the corner booth by the window, the same one I used to sit in, where the heater rattled just enough to keep my hands warm. I pulled out my notebook from my bag, still half damp from the rain. My pen hovered, but I couldn't write yet, not with my heart still racing. The waitress came over, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "Can I get you anything?" I tried to answer, but my voice caught. I nodded instead. "Hot tea, then," she said softly. "You look like you've been through it." That almost made me laugh. Almost. I looked out the window, watching cars blur past in streaks of red and white. That's when the memory hit me, sharp and sudden. It was 3 years ago. Our family had been fighting over the estate after our father died. My older brother was trying to sell off the family property before Cambria had even finished grieving. She'd called me in tears, voice shaking. Said no one had her back. I dropped everything. Drove 6 hours to sit with her on the porch of our childhood home. "You're the only one who's ever been on my side," she'd whispered that night, her head on my shoulder. I'd believed her. Now that memory felt rotten. A rehearsed lie dressed up in sisterly love. Maybe she'd meant it then. But today proved just how cheap that loyalty was. The tea came. I didn't touch it. Just stared at the steam until it faded into nothing. My fingers moved on their own, finally writing a single line in the notebook. "What they don't see coming will be the only thing they remember." I underlined it twice. I didn't know the full plan yet, but I knew one thing for certain. Cambria thought I was done. She thought I'd crawl away, lick my wounds, and let them build my empire on lies and betrayal. But they'd forgotten who built the foundation. They forgot I kept the receipts, and tomorrow I'd start reminding them. The streets outside my apartment were quiet when I got home. No honking, no sirens, just the soft hum of the city refusing to sleep, same as me. I tossed my soaked coat over a chair and kicked off my shoes without thinking. The carpet squished beneath my socks. I left the lights off. There was enough glow from the street lamp outside to guide me across the studio, past the bookshelf lined with my old programming textbooks and startup trophies, each one now feeling like a joke someone played on me. I dropped into the chair by my work desk, the same desk I built this entire company from. It still had the same scratches in the wood, same uneven leg I'd meant to fix for years. My old whiteboard stood in the corner, covered in half-erased formulas, sticky notes curling at the edges. It used to be my map, my plan for changing the world. Now, I just stared at it like it belonged to someone else. I started pacing, slow at first, like maybe if I moved enough I could shake the weight off my chest. I replayed every conversation with Cambria over the past 6 months, the way she'd say, "Just trust me," with that forced tenderness, the way she made everything sound like it was in my best interest. There had been signs. I'd ignored them. I pulled open the top drawer of my desk and grabbed a notebook I hadn't touched in years. Flipping through the pages brought back late nights, cheap ramen, whiteboard wars with myself. I stopped on a page dated 4 years ago, scrawled in my own handwriting. "Keep your head down. Build. Let the work speak." I sighed. I had followed that rule too well. It was 2:47 a.m. when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number. For a second, I considered ignoring it. Then I hit play on the voicemail. "Hi, Ms. Delara. It's Serena. I don't know if you remember me. I was your intern last year, under finance." Her voice was low, shaky, like someone talking from behind a closed door. "I didn't know how to say this, but I think I owe you the truth. I overheard something, weeks ago. Cambria was talking to Alan. She said you'd be easier to push out if they waited until you signed the tax filing alone. That was a month ago. I remember because it was the Friday before the audit review. I have the date if you need it. I'm sorry." The message ended. I sat still. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat. Then I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water with hands that were steadier than they should have been. A month ago. The day she asked me to sign those quarterly returns without the rest of the team. Said it was urgent, that it would just save us time. I'd hesitated. She leaned in and said, "It's just paperwork. I trust you." And like a fool, I trusted her back. I stared at the dark window above the sink. My reflection looked unfamiliar, older, colder. I could hear my dad's voice echoing in my head, one of the last real things he said to me before he passed. "When someone mocks your silence, make sure your return is thunder." I turned, walked to the storage bin under my bed, and pulled out my old laptop. The fan whirred louder than I remembered, but it booted up just fine. I plugged in an external drive and opened the archived folder labeled DL Backups. I'd kept everything: emails, versions of presentations, board documents, Correspondence Cambria thought I deleted. I scanned through the files. Patterns started forming. And then I found it. An internal budget draft dated 3 months ago. Cambria's name in the sender field. And there, buried in the CC line, was Alan Tierney. Why would a consultant be copied on a document discussing internal reallocation? I pulled up 2 more emails from separate threads. Same thing, different subjects, different departments. Same hidden CC. Alan Tierney. I printed one and walked it to the whiteboard. With a red thumbtack, I pinned it dead center. The board wasn't the only thing Cambria had been manipulating. They weren't planning strategy. They were running a long con. Quiet, layered, and patient. The kind of betrayal that only works when you know exactly how much the other person trusts you. And that was my real mistake. I sat back down, looking at the glowing screen, the growing wall of evidence, and the $2 bills still on the edge of my desk. "They've been playing chess," I whispered, my voice low but clear. "But they forgot. I invented the board. There's a difference between silence and surrender. I chose the first, for now. The morning haze hadn't lifted yet when I stepped out. No makeup, no smile. I wasn't there to play nice." The Uber driver kept glancing at me through the rearview mirror, probably wondering what someone in sweats and rain-wrinkled hair was doing headed toward a glass tower in downtown Austin. I didn't offer an explanation. I didn't owe one. When I reached the lobby, the same receptionist from yesterday blinked like she'd seen a ghost. "Ms. DeLara, I need access to the boardroom. Now." My voice came out calm. Not polite, not angry, just precise. She fumbled with the phone, whispered something I didn't catch, then nodded. "You can go up. They're in there already." Perfect. I stepped into the elevator, watching my reflection in the polished steel. I looked tired, but not broken. Not today. When the doors opened, Cambria was mid-laugh. Alan sat beside her, legs crossed, one hand holding a mug like he belonged in every room he entered. They stopped talking when they saw me. Cambria straightened. "You're not supposed to be here." That's never stopped me before. I tossed the printed emails onto the sleek table. "Let's make this quick. I've got better places to be." Alan picked up the top sheet, scanned it, and chuckled. "You brought printouts. How retro." I didn't blink. "Explain why you were CC'd on internal financials months before your official appointment." He leaned back. "I consult. People loop me in. Nothing scandalous." Cambria stayed quiet, arms crossed. "You were planning this before our valuation," I said, pacing now, "before you shoved me out and handed him the keys." Alan smiled. "You signed the transfer paperwork yourself. In April." The room tilted. "What transfer?" He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder, slid it across. "April 14th. Bundle of updates, stock realignment, some reclassification, and control delegation. Your signature's right there." I opened it. My handwriting. My initials on every page. My mind scrambled, trying to recall. That week, I'd been running on fumes. We were closing deals, shipping updates. The servers were crashing hourly. Cambria had said it was all investor housekeeping. "You said these were routine," I murmured. She finally spoke. "They were. You trusted me. And you used that trust like a scalpel. You never wanted the politics," Cambria said, cool and even. "You wanted to build. I kept the roof over your head while you played engineer." Alan chuckled. "Don't be so dramatic, DeLara. This is business." I looked at both of them, realizing they weren't even pretending anymore. He pulled a small envelope from his coat pocket. Set it in front of me. "Severance," he said. $2. "You're lucky we're sentimental." I stared at the envelope, then slowly picked it up, folded it once, and slipped it into my bag. "You think this is the end?" I asked. Cambria gave a bored shrug. "No, it's the beginning of peace. Not for you, I said. I turned and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. The click of my heels was the only sound I left behind. Downstairs, as I stepped outside, the air hit sharper than before. But I wasn't cold. Not anymore. They thought I was done. But I was just getting warmed up. By the time I got home, the city was already sinking into a burnt orange dusk. Austin had that strange way of feeling soft and loud at the same time, sunlight filtering through the blinds, but car horns still stabbing the silence like needles. I dropped my bag at the door and didn't bother changing. My shoes stayed on. My coat, damp with sweat and pride, stayed buttoned. The check was still there. $2. It sat in the middle of the table like a joke that had stopped being funny hours ago. I stood over it for a long time, longer than I should have, and the longer I stared, the more that ugly little slip of paper started to speak. Not with words, but with all the things it implied. You're worth this. You were never built for more. You were lucky to even get this far. What if they were right? The thought hit me harder than I expected. What if I was just good at building code, but not at building people? What if I was always the one they needed to carry the weight, but never the one meant to lead? I sat down slowly, elbows on the table, head in my hands. The light caught the edge of a picture frame sitting in the open drawer. I hadn't looked at it in years. It was us, Cambria and me, barefoot in Grandma's backyard, holding popsicles and grinning with stained tongues. That summer we'd made a pact. No secrets, no lies. We were 7 and 9, back when promises felt unbreakable. Now I wasn't sure if that photo made me sad or sick. Around 4:30, I texted Naomi. You free for a coffee? She replied within seconds. Always? Buzzmill? It was a 5-minute walk, but I took 10. My feet moved slower than my thoughts. The cafe hadn't changed. Dim wood floors, string lights that never quite worked, and the scent of roasted beans baked into the walls. Naomi was already there, sipping something foamy and sweet. She looked up, saw my face, and set her cup down. You okay? I think so, I said. I think I just want peace. She studied me. You say that like you've convinced yourself. Maybe I have. Or maybe you're too tired to want revenge. I smiled, barely. You sound like you know me better than I do. Naomi reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and hesitated. There's something I think you should see. My stomach sank before I even took the phone from her hand. The video was grainy, recorded from behind a plant or low window, but the voices were clear. Alan, standing in a sleek conference room, wineglass in hand, talking to a man I didn't recognize. She didn't even read it, Alan said, smirking. We knew she wouldn't. That's why it worked. The man laughed. Alan raised his glass. She built the house. We just waited until she handed over the keys. The video ended there. For a second, I didn't speak. I couldn't. The air in my chest thinned. Where'd this come from? My voice felt tight. Naomi shrugged, gently. Sent to me. No name, just the file. I guess someone wanted it to find the right eyes. I handed the phone back, numb. Naomi leaned forward. Delara, they didn't just steal from you. They humiliated you. On purpose. I nodded, but didn't respond. We sat in silence a minute longer. The music from the barista's speaker was slow jazz, barely audible. Eventually, I stood. You okay? She asked again. I nodded. I just remembered something my dad used to say. What's that? If they spit on your crown, don't throw it away, straighten it. Naomi smiled, almost sadly. What are you gonna do? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The walk back to my apartment felt shorter this time. The sun had dipped below the skyline completely, and the night was settling in like a quiet accomplice. I opened my laptop, created a new folder, named it Phase 1. They wanted quiet. What they'll get is precision. After I created the folder and named it Phase 1, I just sat there. No music, no distractions, just the click of the ceiling fan above me and the low hum of my laptop warming up. This wasn't going to be a war of noise. It was going to be a war of details. Slow, clean, deliberate. I opened Naomi's folder and began reviewing every document, every file, every timestamp. The deeper I went, the clearer the pattern became. Expenses backdated, vendor contracts with inflated numbers, and emails that had been marked as seen before they'd officially been sent. Sloppy, but smugly hidden. The kind of digital arrogance only people like Alan have, too smart for paper trails, too cocky to cover the digital ones. By 1:00 a.m., I started a new subfolder titled Trail. This time, everything I found would have a copy, a backup, and a place to breathe. I leaned back and let my eyes close for a minute. And I heard my father's voice again, not imagined, but echoing from somewhere deep, something he used to say when I was a teenager, seething over some injustice at school. "You don't swing first, Delara. Let 'em throw the punch, then make sure they never forget you were standing when it was over." It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about knowing when the moment was yours, and I knew who I needed next. Ollie. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly 2 years. Last I heard, Alan had pushed him out with a trumped-up performance review. Too quiet, too slow, not culture fit enough. In truth, Ollie had been one of the sharpest IT minds I'd ever worked with. What he lacked in charm, he made up for in precision. That word again. I opened my encrypted chat app and typed, "Hey, it's Delara. I need your help. You in?" The 3 dots popped up almost immediately. Thought you'd never ask. We met the next evening. I chose a booth in a diner tucked behind a car wash in South Austin, the kind of place with flickering overhead bulbs and a jukebox nobody bothered fixing. Perfect. Ollie slid into the booth wearing a hoodie and glasses that looked like they hadn't been cleaned since 2020. But he was sharp. His eyes never stopped scanning, always thinking 5 layers down. "I figured this day would come," he said. No greeting. "I didn't," I admitted. He glanced around. "You want to take them down?" "No," I said. "I want the truth out. Documented, public. If they crumble under it, that's their doing." He nodded, slowly. "If we do this, we do it clean, legal, and slow." I smiled. "That's the only way I want it." He sipped his coffee, black, no sugar, and pulled out a tablet from his backpack. "I've been keeping notes since I left. You weren't the only one they treated like trash, but they were sloppy and cocky." Ollie slid the tablet toward me. The screen showed a list of shell accounts and internal file paths that looked like gibberish to most, but not to me. Alan registered a company under a dummy name in Delaware. Cambria signed a few vendor agreements tied to it. Looks like money was moved in loops, enough to confuse investors, but not a forensic accountant. I blinked. "How do you have this?" "I used to build the security walls, remember? They forgot I know the weak spots." The next few days blurred into a rhythm. Ollie and I worked remotely, using encrypted calls, burner logins, and alias accounts. We pulled archived server logs, flagged suspicious file changes, and unearthed investor communications that had quietly vanished from company servers. I reached out to Jules, my old mentor from the startup accelerator in San Antonio. She was skeptical at first. "I thought you were done, Del." "I was? Then they made it personal." Jules didn't ask more. She just said, "Whatever you need, I'm in." We were rebuilding something, not a company, not yet, but a backbone. One night, while combing through a backup email archive Ollie had recovered, a strange attachment appeared in a folder marked Legal, Hold, Archive, Old. It was an audio file, labeled TFW, Final Note, MP4. My heart stopped. TFW, my dad's initials. I clicked play. The voice that filled my speakers wasn't memory. It wasn't imagination. It was real. The audio file was less than 6 minutes long. And yet, I've never heard anything that cracked me open with more precision than those 5 minutes and 42 seconds. It started with a breath. My father's breath. Not some formal recorded message or stiff scripted goodbye. Just him as he was. Sitting, maybe late at night like I was now, alone, thoughtful. The kind of moment he never let anyone see when he was alive. But he'd saved it. For me. "Delara," his voice said, low and warm. "If you're hearing this, I'm guessing things have gotten complicated." My hand gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white. "I wanted you to have this app first, because you're the only one I've ever seen lead with both head and heart. You see people, not just systems. You don't build for profit, you build for purpose. That's the difference. That's why it had to be you." I pressed my other hand over my mouth, trying to stay quiet, but the ache in my chest swelled too fast. He paused in the recording, just long enough for me to hear a pen clicking in the background. Then he went on. "I've worked with too many people who smiled with their teeth and stabbed with their silence. You need to know, blood doesn't equal loyalty. Don't trust someone just because they share your name. Trust what they do when no one's watching." I swear I could feel him in the room, sitting across from me like we used to at the kitchen table after Mom passed. Back when he gave me his first broken-down laptop and said, "Take it apart. Make it better." And I did. Don't let your heart get used against you. Not even by family. Then came the sound of a date stamp, one of those old digital tags he insisted on using for personal archives. I recognized the beep. Cambria wouldn't. She wouldn't know that meant the file was legally tied to his last will, a backup archive stored separately. The file ended. But I didn't cry from grief. Not this time. I cried because for the first time since Cambria shoved that check in my hand, I felt something anchor back in me. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. "You didn't leave me with nothing," I whispered, staring at the laptop screen. "You left me the truth." The sun hadn't even risen when I started uploading copies of the audio to my encrypted cloud. One for me, one for my lawyer. One marked, "To release when necessary." That morning, after a few hours of rest I didn't even remember taking, I changed into a gray blazer I hadn't worn in months. It still had the scent of lavender from the last dry cleaning. Familiar. Sharp. I joined a scheduled virtual investor roundtable, the kind I used to lead before the coup. Some of the same faces appeared. Sharon from Fort Collins, Eli from San Mateo, 2 others from the early beta funding round. They looked surprised to see me. One leaned in and said, "Delara, we heard, well, that you were no longer involved." I kept my tone calm, steady. I was pushed out, but what I built, they're standing on it, and now it's cracking beneath them. I didn't show everything, just enough. Select files, excerpts from the shell company logs, financial inconsistencies. I blurred names, kept dates intact, just enough to raise concern, just enough for their eyes to widen. "This isn't an attempt to destroy," I said. "This is about protecting what we actually invested in. Because I didn't build this to be used as a funnel for someone else's greed." They didn't ask a lot of questions, not yet, but they nodded, wrote things down. Sharon leaned back and said, "Thank you for not disappearing." I logged off. An hour later, Cambria emailed me, subject line, "Enough. You want to play hero? Fine, but keep poking and I'll bury you for good. That's not a threat, it's a promise." I read it twice. I didn't react with fear, not anymore. I hit reply. "You already tried. I just grew roots." Then I clicked send, turned off notifications, and walked up to my apartment building's rooftop. The sunset was bleeding into the skyline, burnt orange, soft gray. Austin always did dusk right. I held my phone, pulled up the audio file, and played the last few seconds again. Just to feel grounded, just to hear that beep one more time. Then I opened my cloud drive, found the folder marked Family Timestamp, and renamed the file, The Voice They Tried to Bury. And I added one line to the backup note, Release only if they try again. And it was no longer about revenge. It was about what they feared most, exposure. That thought pulsed through me as the escalator carried me down into the main hall of the tech summit in Houston. The crowd buzzed with energy, people shuffling, laughing, pitching startups over coffee and clunky lanyards. It should have felt intimidating, walking into the belly of a space where I was no longer welcome. But instead, I felt calm. Not quiet, not small, just clear. Alan's face was plastered on a banner near the registration table. Keynote speaker, Ethics in Innovation. The irony nearly made me laugh. Cambria's name wasn't on the official schedule, but the whispers said she'd be making a surprise appearance to help restore the company's image. Cute. The truth was, I'd been preparing for this for weeks. Quietly, precisely. 2 of our earliest investors, people who had known me before the app was worth anything, were waiting in the wings. Naomi had flown in the night before and sat in the press section. Ollie was here too, blending in, running the cue that would hit everyone's phones the moment the curtain lifted. Alan took the stage 10 minutes late. Typical. He adjusted the mic, cleared his throat, and started with a practiced smile. Innovation isn't just about what we build. It's about how we lead, how we partner, how we protect those who believe in us. Cue the first wave. A chorus of phones buzzed throughout the auditorium. Heads dropped, eyes widened. I could feel the shift, subtle but unmistakable. A collective inhale. The headline on every screen read, 250 Malmsum Startup Implosion. Co-founder alleges internal sabotage, financial cover-ups. Alan paused, glanced at someone off stage, then tried to recover with a forced chuckle. Seems we've got some excitement today. He didn't finish the next sentence. Cambria stormed into the media room behind the stage like a gust of bad weather in heels. I was already there, waiting. What the hell do you think you're doing? She hissed, eyes flaming. You're ruining everything. This is defamation, Delara. Do you want me to sue you into the ground? I didn't flinch. I pulled a white envelope from my bag and slid it across the table. She stared. What is that? Your cease and desist, I said evenly. Drafted by the same lawyer you poached from me last spring. Remember her? Her fingers twitched but didn't take the envelope. Before she could speak again, the moderator burst in, breathless. Ms. Delara, would you join us? The press is requesting a statement. Cambria lunged forward. She doesn't speak for the company. I stood. I'm not here to speak for the company, I said. I'm here to speak for what it used to be. Inside the media room, under 2 bright lights and a wall of cameras, I kept my voice steady. A reporter asked the first question, something about conflicting leadership narratives. I answered by plugging in my drive. The file was already queued, no commentary, no build-up, just the sound of my father's voice filling the room. You're the one who sees people, he said, clear as if he were standing next to me. That's why this app is yours, Delara. A beat, then, don't trust someone just because they share your blood. At the end, the timestamp clicked. Proof of date, intention, and ownership. The silence in the room felt sacred. Cambria, who'd elbowed her way to the side of the podium, snapped, He was senile when he said that. You all know that. He wasn't thinking clearly at the end. It was too late. The crowd turned. Cameras caught everything. Her voice, her panic, her collapse of control. And I said nothing. I didn't need to. I packed up my laptop, turned toward the exit. Behind me, the screen faded to a single closing slide, white text, black background. Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's the setup for truth. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. For the first time in years, I didn't need anyone to speak for me. The truth spoke loud enough. By the next morning, headlines had replaced billboards. Cambria and Alan's names were no longer being tossed around with admiration. They were being dissected with suspicion. The clip of my father's voice had gone viral, not because it was dramatic, but because it was unmistakably real. I watched it all unfold from the quiet of my apartment, barefoot, wrapped in an old sweatshirt. I didn't rush to answer the dozens of emails. I didn't need to. The world was answering for me. By midday, former team members started coming forward. Some I hadn't heard from in years. They posted messages of support online, but some sent quiet DMs, sharing screenshots, timelines, receipts. A former accountant emailed a PDF that showed Alan had moved $120,000 through a shell account 3 months before my dismissal. Another former dev flagged a discrepancy in the back-end code. Alan had tampered with the attribution tag on the app's engine just 2 weeks before launch. Investors began backing out publicly. One even tweeted, "We backed genius, not fraud." That one made me smile. Cambria's team scrambled to do damage control. She appeared on a podcast 2 days later, her voice polished but tight. "It's unfortunate when grief is weaponized," she said, "and I deeply believe the file is doctored." That same afternoon, a top digital forensics firm released their findings. Authentic, unedited, time-stamped, real. By the end of the week, Alan was gone. No posts, no statements, just disappeared. One article claimed he'd been spotted boarding a plane to Dubai. His contract was quietly terminated. Cambria, however, stayed. Alone. She tried to rebuild the story, paint me as unstable, emotionally fragile, easily manipulated, but her words didn't land the same anymore. She'd underestimated what happens when truth finds light. Still, I didn't gloat. That's not why I started this. I got offers, some of them lucrative. One VC firm offered me a blank check to rebuild the app under a new brand, full ownership, no questions asked. I read the email twice, then deleted it. I didn't want to rebuild, not out of spite, out of peace. A few days later, I found myself walking into a tiny cafe tucked between 2 laundromats in East Austin. It hadn't changed much since I was a teenager. The same chipped floor tiles, the same smell of cinnamon and dust, same napkin holder, shaped like a folded leaf, sitting like it had waited for me all these years. I sat by the window where my father and I used to spend Saturday mornings. He'd order black coffee and tell me to ask hard questions, even when the answers hurt, especially then. I sat there a long while, just breathing, letting it all be real, the pain, the mess, the survival. A girl, maybe 8 or 9, sat at the table next to mine with her mom. She kept sneaking glances at me like she was trying to place me. Eventually, she turned and whispered, "You're the lady who beat the bad guys." I smiled, folding my hands in front of me. "No, sweetheart," I said softly. "I just stopped letting them win." The girl blinked at that, then nodded like she understood more than most adults. Later that evening, I walked through the park my father used to jog in. The sun was low, casting long golden shadows on the trail. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't reach for it. Not yet. I paused at the bench near the pond. Our bench. The one we carved our initials into when I was 11. The wood was weathered now, but the grooves still held our mark. I sat, let the breeze move through me. I didn't forgive Cambria. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I also didn't hate her anymore. I'd carried that weight long enough. I didn't need it to survive. And when I stood to leave, the wind shifted just slightly, brushing past my shoulders like an old friend. I exhaled. They thought I'd stay silent. But silence was never weakness. It was the sound before the roar,